Welcome back to the Failing Upward Club. This is a space to reflect on the tough lessons from failure, working through how to improve and not repeat the same things over and over again. Danny, welcome back to another episode. How are you?
I love, we were just, before we hit roll, we're talking about who's doing the intro and it not being funny, and you nearly got through the intro. You nearly got through it, but there's a little giggle. But you know what? I think that's the nature of this. Is there's no second takes. There's no make sure it's perfectly polished, because the nature of these conversations is exactly about being unpolished, being unfiltered, and just saying it how it is, Mike. So I'm doing well. Just sitting there watching you struggle to get that out was very satisfying.
That's good. I've got the giggles. I'm like a little school kid, but that's okay. So we're back for another episode. This is episode number 7. I've been having a great time cracking through them. We're hot off the back of data and all things external data, value data last week. And this week we're going to talk about product lessons. So to stick with the general convention, I'll give us the kind of key lessons up front, and then we'll get into a bit of detail. So the first one being around the trap of building kind of infinite flexibility into a product. And we learned that giving users the option to experience a product or utilize a product in many different ways, which we assumed would create a product with a lot of value for many different user personas, actually ended up translating in the client's mind like complexity. So we'll dig into that. The next one being around kind of the value of a demonstration versus the value in deployment. And again, learning that what wows in a room on a first call or a demo call isn't necessarily what wows clients when they get their hands on the technology. Learning around like productizing the solution. So having to evolve from thinking we could be pure software into being software, services, and we've even spoken about how data played a role there. So a one-trick pony wasn't enough to get the deals done at the end of the day. We're kind of going over it here, but something around the ability to coach users through a platform and giving them guided workflows through a kind of, this brings back into the flexibility piece. And a really big one here that like any feature that intimidates an end user is ultimately going to be a feature that doesn't get adopted or can ultimately have a massive impact on the adoption of your technology overall. Danny, anything that you think we need to put on the list that we're going to cover, or are you comfortable that that gives us a fair bit there?
Mate, I think there's a lot to talk about. In there. And so I'm happy to just crack in. But before we do, I think I haven't written down anything specifically on this for this conversation, but I think part of the starting point for this really becomes also about like, what is a product? Like what do you call as a product and a proposition, and what does it include? Like at what point does something become a product versus not being a product? And we had lots of learnings that kind of go across all of those different aspects to this, but really like the product, like again, haven't pre-thought through a definition of a product here, and I'm sure all these product experts out of the woodworks will come out and have their own academic opinion, but in my mind it's something which has been crafted and curated of a combination of many different things, technology, data, whatever it needs to be, coming together to solve a specific need or problem. And the nature of that problem and how you're trying to solve it can change what a product looks like, from being something which is really, really technical to being a fully fledged user experience and all of that. And I think the nature of like what does a product look like going forward is probably one we can touch on at the end. But I think the starting point here is probably anytime we're talking about product, there's this first layer conversation which is about how do you even define what your product is and how do you put a bound around that? Because that's what then guides you through all of these other aspects in terms of what you want to build versus what you don't want to build. And as we go into yours around, are you building in flexibility? Are you building in an ease of deployment? Like what does that actually need to look like? So I think the first point before we get into anything is probably just defining what a product is another one of those really, really difficult things, I think, like similar to what the value proposition, and they're probably very closely aligned to be honest, but yeah, what did you think about how well we defined the products, and even give a bit of an overview of what we started, like where we started and what we ended up towards the back end defining products as, even within our solution.
Yeah, nice. I will do that, Danny. I'm not skirting around your question, but I think the other one, just as you're sort of talking there, I think the other interesting thing to reflect on as we go is like the impact of the product decisions on the broader business model holistically as well. And so as your product bleeds from pure technology to technology plus services, and you productize elements of that, then you've got to think about the resourcing that sits behind that. So if I was to give a very unpolished definition of the product, it's almost bringing it back to the business model. It's like, what is that single unit of capability that can be sold to an end customer? And so to your point around where did we start with that and where did we end with that, the kind of units of capability that we were initially in market selling as products were purely software, or purely like literally capability, software capability. The way we thought about that was the particular kind of analytical function, if you will, that it delivered. So when we first went to market, when we were testing a bit of a kind of an MVP, there was this holistic solution that enabled collaboration between organizations. Then we went through a process, and I'm going back in time here for sort of 3-4 years, so correct me if I'm wrong here. Then we kind of tried to bite off different parts of that capability stack, if you will. So we had more core capability, which included matching and some simple analytics, and then we built some kind of premium service, which included some like ML modeling and all these other types of capability. What we learned through that was that product was kind of hard to sell for a number of reasons. Part of it was the customer or the client's understanding how they actually utilize that. But the other part that made it complex, and we spoke about this in the data episode last week a little bit as well, was inherently in selling collaboration technology, you're then selling to two organizations. And so you're giving them just the technology and a capability, and both organizations would need to come on that buying process or journey, get comfortable, all those things at the same time. That became really hard. Then we embedded anchor data, as we termed it last week, into the solution. So then what we were able to evolve to was not just the core capability, actually it was creating really specific productized insights from our technology linked with bank data, potentially combining that with a client's own data, and then kind of re-architecting the product suite from that point in time. So immediately that became more easy to sell because it was a single client buying that product, as opposed to then like two clients or partnerships or ecosystems buying that product. But it also meant that we could get or start to get, as we were sort of going through at the end of our journey, like chunking that down into very, very specific outcomes for clients, and having a bit of flexibility around pricing that appropriate for an outcome for a particular client.
Yeah, it's a good overview, Mike. And I think the key, just to extend on where you're getting to from the end, it was the important point was, and we touched on in the data conversation before, and some of the stuff on technology, like it wasn't just about saying, hey, here's financial transaction data or collaboration technology, and this is all the things you can do for it, and you pay access and you go and do something. It was about pulling it in with a use case and saying, we're going to define we had these like product families, and we had like a specific product would be about like opportunity exploration and understanding your growth opportunity, which had views around what your market you're participating in, how that was growing, what customers existed, who your customers were. And what we found as we started to break it down is we had a whole lot around kind of this first view of like sizing growth, this view around looking at the different levers for executing on growth, whether it be thinking about locations really deeply, whether it be thinking about your products really deeply or your pricing really deeply. We had a whole space about activation, which was really kind of tied back to some of the core functionality you spoke about at the start. And we had a space around measurement. And that was a product framework that we ended up landing on. And by the time we got to the end, some of those pieces in the product like framework that we had it's nearly a whole business in their own right. And this is the challenge when you're a startup and you're looking at some of these spaces, is like you could just focus in one particular area and just rinse that as a product and try to niche down and go at it. And we spoke about this in go-to-market and value articulation. But the proposition we had, one of the challenges was we just had so much opportunity. There was so many use cases we could tackle. There were so many industries. And so we didn't feel it was the right justification of our service to just say we're only going to look at retailers in sizing their business and looking at market share. We're just not going to double down on that. But we did see those product areas start to mature to the point where they were looking like they could become their own little unit of themselves. And that's why we were getting the traction and growth we achieved by the end of the business. It was because those things really started to click. Now, where we were thinking internally for the next phase of it all, though, was those individual blocks were good, but were we missing a trick by not taking something through the life cycle and thinking about connecting all of those things together and not having measurement as a product necessarily, but it's all together, and there's no right or wrong answers to that. I think the key things, though, that come back to it really come into your first point that you raised around the flexibility trap. And I think we were surfing a really fine line there between having the right amount of flexibility and having too much flexibility that someone doesn't know exactly what they can do. Because if you say, oh, but you can measure and you can do this and you can do this and you can do this, what it led to was a heavy consultative sale, because somebody wasn't just taking something, here's just one value prop, here's a single line, and doing what they wanted with it. We needed to work with them to nearly map them to the right product to focus them in on. And that was fine for our business and was proving to be quite effective, but it was very close to being too much flexibility. And if I really want to reflect back to the start of the journey you articulated with the technology, when we were still in this like platform tech space, it was too much flexibility, and it was this feature factory, and it was like choose your own adventure and do this and do this and do this, and you very quickly like that is the play. There's businesses for that. There absolutely are. Like that's the Snowflakes of the world. That's the AWSs of the world. Like these really big platform-based businesses, which is like pick and build whatever you want to do, and we'll give you the component pieces. But it's just a different sell. It's a different product or proposition you're trying to go towards. And I think a lot of the time it does lead to putting so much reliance on someone as an end user needing to know what to do. And I think why we pivoted why we positioned and created our products was A, because we got access to some data which really changed the whole flavor of the proposition, but B, we had that internal mindset that we touched on in the tech conversation, I'm pretty sure, around wearing some of that complexity ourselves to try to simplify the proposition for an end client.
Yeah, love it. And I think, Danny, that brings us on to the second point. I think you've covered the flexibility part pretty well there, but just the learnings around, the product not just ever being a standalone piece of technology, but even in its final kind of iteration, not even just being a standalone insight. And I think, what we learned was that probably there's more service required, or there's a base level of service that's required, I think, especially in the early phases of a company's life, just to get kind of the sell and support that sell. So I think the reality of thinking you're going to be a hands-off, pure kind of just, click the button, take a seat on this platform. I think there's businesses that have scaled like that, right? You've got the Slacks of the world and some of these other companies that have gone in and just got the engineers to click a button and start using them, and they've been hands-off. But then, what's the actual reality of that? You look at those businesses now, and there's tens of thousands of people working all across the globe in customer success and support and all this type of stuff. So I think just having that healthy expectation that nothing is going to be exclusive of services, especially for the first, many years of scaling, is probably the right way to look at these things.
Yeah, exactly. And it does go into your second point you were raising around the making something sexy for a demonstration versus deployment and what that complexity is. And it's nearly that recognition around where you find the lines with the product between how much something really is self-service and just being honest about that. But working out where's the right time to invest the time and effort to make it as simple as possible. Like we spent a long time as we were going through, like working through what do we need to make self-service, what do we need to make something which is a supported pathway to onboard. So even for us, it was something as simple as like adding a new organization in. And we had some big internal debates for a long time when we were just in the technology stage around, should we build this full flow that someone can just sign up through the website and put down a credit card and they've got an environment and it's all ready to go, and that whole thing is like a seamless experience. They've got some kind of payment that's self-service, they've got some kind of access to the platform, and we never did do that whole flow, mainly because, well, I think this is probably something we did do right, is in my mind thinking about whether we should ever build that whole path. I was like, as soon as we get 50 people coming to the website clicking I want to sign up right this very minute and I'm just going to go into the platform and try it out, then let's go and build that. And the reality is we never did. That's not the nature of the business we had. It wasn't the nature of what we were selling. We weren't generating a whole lot of like inbound leads through our website necessarily. The sales model and the engagement model was very different and typically involved a more complex landscape to be able to sell into. So I think the product space, there's this whole balance between trying to make it as simple as you can to have people on board and whatnot, but it's also about how do you make sure you're not building too much capability that you might not actually need.
Danny, one thing that wasn't on the list, but as you've just been discussing then, that I think is probably a question for you, given you wore the CPO hat at Dataco, is around managing feature bloat, whilst also kind of thinking about, and the thing that you're balancing there is having an engineering workforce that at times needed work to do, but not having kind of a client book 3 years ago that demanded new feature creation. So there was a period in the business where I think it was best attempt and best guess at what the next feature and capability needed to be in our platform to keep a team busy and interested. And some of the stuff we built was like incredibly advanced, but in reality, it was never used in the end. So like any reflections on how you would maybe make the call the same way, different way, or what you'd change up the next time around on that front?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this particular point, but the reality is, depending on the type of business that you create and depending on the life cycle of where you are, you're going to have this, you might have this trade-off where you'll have times where you don't have enough to do from a hardcore customer feature request perspective, versus times where you've just got so many things that people are asking for. I think you're in that position where people are just asking you for features left, right, and center, and you're balancing them. You're in a good spot. I think that's a great business to be involved with, and I think we've touched on this in the rest of the value proposition, where we naturally weren't, because we had to build it in this CVC structure. We had it wasn't like we were just guessing. We knew a whole bunch of features and functionality we wanted to build from the start, and we had a client that was there ready to do them with different use cases. Whether they fully realize those use cases or not is a different thing. But I think the reality is, when you're in that type of space, I think it's a bit of there's just a bit of gambling that needs to go on with it. And there's a certain aspect towards, yes, run hard and work out what you need to build in terms of customer feedback and the rest of it. But there's going to be certain things which are there where you're saying, look, we're going to make some bets on features or functionality that we think we can sell. And I don't really believe in the whole just don't build anything until people fully ask necessarily, because you're always a step behind. And there's certain things you can just put your hat on where you say, we're definitely going to need this, and this is no regrets activity. And we definitely spent time throughout our journey as Dataco where there was good blocks of time where the guys had capacity. And we had a really lean engineering team. and they still had capacity in those things to build, and we were like, all right, where are we going to make some bets? Where are we going to push hard at? And did they all come off? Like, no. A lot of them came super close, but I think it's more like, how do you take the risk out of that decision by trying to, if you're going to make a bet, how do you make it in a way which is, you're still building MVP in the bet, so you're not over developing, you're not over like building a feature that may not be used. And we did do that for certain things. Like we did that with there was a feature in the early days around synthetic data. And there was this whole, when we were first in the platform only space, we were talking about doing computation between organizations, but you can't see the underlying data. And the theory was, well, if you can't see the underlying data, why not create a synthetic data set based on what the data will actually look like if it was together, but it doesn't contain any PII, it's still structured, it looks the same. And it was like a really great idea, and it got people quite excited, but they just never really like turned up the use case where we needed it. And when we ended up kind of rejigging the platform over the years, we got to a point where we're just like, we're just not going to rebuild that. Like when we remove things across into this new structure, let's just like, that just sits there, and it's probably still sitting in one of the old code repos from the platform that was just like mothballed really. And it was like, one day this may come up, and people end up going and making synthetic data businesses, which wasn't the business we really wanted to go after. But I think that's just the reality of when you build a product. You're going to have to, at times, make some bets and have some conviction over, no, we've got a vision over what we think is going to be here. We've got a vision over some kind of functionality that we believe will provide value and we think we can sell. And like, it's not as clear cut as the books tell you in terms of, oh, don't build it, never build it until someone asks for it, until they're ripping your ear off. Like, sure, in some businesses get to that point, but there's a ton of startups who'll be sitting there building without fully having the demand to meet that just yet.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And to be frank, as someone who, I mean, we both were involved in kind of the client sales conversations, it is bloody nice to have a few redundant features that show up really well on a demo and kind of create a bit of feature differentiation as well. Because, I mean, you're building like core capability as parity to whatever your channel kind of competitors are offering in the market. But some of those kind of more special things like the BYO models and all of that type of stuff that we had available through the platform, which worked, like fully worked in production, everything, like also very powerful when you're kind of telling a story about what the future might be. And I think when we were talking before around like the features and even just like the product construct and the product architecture as you articulated, it's like that balance, and this probably goes back into the go-to-market side, like the discipline to just sell like the product or feature that you know the client needs today versus, I think that my mindset in a lot of this was also giving them the confidence that like this is a capability that will grow with their own internal capability or as they experience and benefit from the product. And so again, you kind of hit this inflection point where selling future capability then turns into like perceived complexity. And you know that, I mean, it's probably a conversation that we should have had a couple of weeks ago, but it's that like tipping point, right, that I think was always very interesting. And even within a business, like it's the right message to sell the business, but you're potentially not telling that message to the right person, because you know what, they've got their blinkers on and they're just the guy that does the audience activation for the publisher. I don't really care about the insights piece because that's a whole other department. The dude that's signing the check, he absolutely needs to know, or the lady that's signing the check absolutely needs to know, because that's the differentiating factor, which means you get the nod over someone else. But yeah, interesting.
No, I completely agree, man. And there's the other balance that gets thrown in there is the feature demands for proof of concepts, which never fully come to fruition, right? Like there was some proof of concepts like, you have to do this. This is what we need to do for the proof of concept. And you're like, that's the whole startup balance to say, can we fully do that? No, nope. But how do we get it to a point where we're comfortable enough doing that, but knowing that you can then go and like build out the rest of it once you've got the tick, and you're not just building something that someone says, no, we never need that. So it's a tough balance, I think, finding those priorities, and a lot of it does come back to even the point you're making at the start around also knowing the boundaries in terms of where you want to play, how much you want to give someone a product which is self-service and only technology versus we'll have some services component, and saying, well, we want to be comfortable enough in our proposition and our product and our expertise more broadly to say some of this is going to be guided to start with. Like, we know this is how you need to craft it and do it. And like, as over time, we continue to simplify these things, but it's going to have some onboarding steps first, and we're going to work with you to set it up. And like, largely, I feel like any of those times we thought was a bit of manual effort, people didn't really care that much about. They just needed to know what they needed to do, and if you help walk them through it, then it didn't matter that it wasn't a single click. Like, this isn't some consumer app where someone's got this really neat experience, and if they don't nail it first time, they're never going to use it. These are people in enterprise, well, in our space anyway, who are used to having to do work. And you think about the large major platforms from, I won't name and shame anyone, but shit, that stuff isn't self-service. Like, those type of platforms have so much complexity in them, and there's so many things they need to do, and that's why you have the SI industry for consultants needing to come in and set it up for them. So
totally right. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole industry, right, to remove the complexity. I think one of the areas, Danny, like one of the real concrete areas where we've definitely learned some lessons and would apply it differently in the future is balancing what gets surfaced from a kind of a security or privacy posture. Specifically, what I'm referring to here is around like our matching capability. So one of the big challenges we'd experienced ourselves through some incumbent players, but also had expressed to us through some of our early clients, was, you know, some of the traditional patterns of data matching or data washing, like were these black boxes, and you know, you never knew what you were getting out. You never knew the methodology that was being applied. So one of the design decisions was to really surface and give users the power to see exactly what was happening, to tweak and turn a lot of the dials around how they were matching and why. What we learned was that was like far too much information for really all but the most advanced users in this case. And so it's this balance of, like, again, demos extremely well, probably got a lot of sales because you have this demonstrable capability, but it's almost like, how do you then toggle that off and just go to basic mode and say, upload, protect my files, push files onto platform, match files, get result? Because ultimately that's all the end user wants to do. But again, I think like this dual experience of like the demo capability, the under the hood capability, but it's almost like, as I'm saying it, it's that toggle to kind of basic mode. And that's all you kind of really need for 99% of the users on a platform.
yeah, exactly. And I think some of that goes to, I can't remember which conversation we're talking about in this one, maybe the tech one, but it's like, how much do you want to take on that complexity? Because like the click to basic mode is actually simple. Like, it's a far simpler path to give them the component pieces and let them construct it and go through what they need to do. That's the full flexibility. It's very simple to do, actually. But to take away all that complexity is like a choice you need to make to create a basic mode even. And again, like, you've just got to work out where's the right places in the business and in the product to take on that complexity and just turn it into basic mode. As you said, like the strength you get out of having the flexibility does just turn into complexity, or it just turns into you sitting on a call onboarding someone and they're like, all right, what number do I put here? And you're like, put in a 3. All right, click that. Like, and that's okay as well, because there was reasons for why you needed to do it. But at the end of the day, maybe there was simpler paths to tell the story in a different way. And a lot of the product kind of sales ends up being, what is the story you're telling anyway? So yeah, it's a really tough balance. And this is why you do have product experts who exist in the world and product managers who try to go in and work through that complexity and work through what you need to build and what you don't need to build and how you craft it and how you think through the journey. Like, that's the whole reason those professions do exist.
Yeah, and the last point that I'd had in that the sort of overview, and it talks to this. It's like, how are the features kind of creating this feeling of empowerment versus intimidation? And you know, the simple complex, it all sort of bleeds into the same area, right? And it's hard to do when you're running some pretty full on like mathematical kind of computations in the background as well, right? Because part of it is proving you're doing what you're doing and you're not just saying you're doing something, and the other part is making it easy and simple to use.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that intimidation is like it's not to be ignored, right? Like you do want people to feel like they've got like this is a tool that really supports them and they can do everything that they need to do. And I think one of the product decisions we made, and whether this is it's not that hard to uphold, but it's the whole dual track path in terms of having this simple UI and try to take out as much complexity, and that's where we wore a lot of the effort. But underneath that sat the SDK, and ultimately, if someone wanted to do more complex things, do it in the SDK. And part of, after we'd been building for a while, I think the mantra started going down that pathway of saying, look, what if they want to do this and this and this and this? And you just kind of had to classify that and say, if they want to do all those things, they're an advanced user, they're a technical user, they don't even want to be looking at a screen, they just want to be writing code, stick it in the SDK, we don't need to expose that through the front end. And I think that pathway held true. What I think is going to be interesting though is we now have like a third pathway going forward, which is about what is the role of AI agents in products. Like what is a product? Who is the consumer of the product? Is that a person? Is that a technical user? Is that a machine? Is that an agent? Like it becomes a whole new space to think about how you build products now, because the interaction layer is being morphed really quickly. It's also becoming really, really, like it's really fast to build something now. Like go jump onto Lovable and throw in a couple of prompts and boom, it's like you got a whole UI that's sitting there and you can see what you can do. It's like the way of building stuff is just rapidly changing. And I've had lots of interesting kind of philosophical conversations with people around like what is the experience of the future for a lot of these products? Is it a handcrafted, curated experience of a dashboard or a workflow and do this and help to walk it through? Is it curating that experience for an agent to do? Is it just letting an agent go and do whatever the hell it wants and let it work out how to do it and just writing the right kind of structures for it to interact with? Is it letting a user create their own experience? So how do they want to see it? Maybe they can create their own kind of take on a user interface and save that as a structure. So you've got an evolving UI for particular users. Like there's no right answer at this point in time, but I do think while we're going through the rapid change kind of consistency challenge of AI as we have it today, I think it's a hybrid approach. I think having something which is purely just an agent's going to go do it and I'm just going to have a chat interface and that's all I need, I think is a bit naive at this point in time, because it's just not consistent enough. Even when it does get consistent, it just becomes really hard to then follow and have like see the same information every single time. Like we all experience this. I think we've said it before on the pod here, but like go and look at your OpenAI, ChatGPT kind of list of conversations and go look at your Claude conversations or your Gemini conversations, and it's like it's a mess. Like because you try to structure it, even if you put it into folders and chats and all of these things, after a certain point, there's so much context in there, and you're like, oh, I had this really good section that I got to where I was like, all right, cool, here's my definition of whatever it was. But as soon as you write stuff underneath, it's like, fuck, where was that again? And then you're scrolling up and you're trying to find it, and then you're asking the agents of this to go. I don't know. It's not a repeatable path as we currently have it. And I think having an experience which combines a curated, crafted experience, and that's where the real value of a team comes in, because you can put your experience, you can put your intellectual property, you can put your knowledge of the use case into this experience to say, based on what we've seen, it's best for you to see this and this and this. That's a repeatable pathway. Here's an agent to just do whatever the one over the top of you want, and here's some code to just whack about if you need to as well.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, the like consistency is incredibly important, right? Especially in enterprise applications. If you're producing reports and these type of things, like it can't be the case that the AI just ran a query in a different way month on month, and that's why the numbers changed. And also, I think we probably overestimate people's ability to ask the right questions as well. It's like like, not everyone's asking the right educated question. Well, I mean, we experienced this with some of the featured, like our little AI kind of sidekick that we dropped into the platform. It's like, okay, now it's just natural language, just dropping your question. It's like, okay, kind of blank stare back at you.
Yeah, what do we ask? Yeah.
The most important question that you should be asking to improve the performance of your business. It's like, fuck, if I knew that, it's not the AI that I need. Like that is at the heart of everything, right? So
yeah, exactly. And I think in this insight space, it also comes down to consumption, right? Like this is people have been feeling this in the dashboarding domain for years. Like, oh, I'm going to go invest and I'm going to build these fancy Tableau dashboards and this is going to have all the information. And then what happens at the end of the day? It's like, it's interactive. You've got drop down menus and all this stuff. And then someone just takes a fucking screenshot and sticks it like as a PDF into a pack that they give that's printed out by the exco or the board. And they're just like looking at a piece of paper anyway. It's like, so much of this stuff becomes good in theory to say how people are just going to be able to ask whatever they want or explore however they want. But at the end of the day, it's not always how things are consumed. And I think it's important to have a practical lens over what you're building and how you think about crafting information, because at the end of the day, that's what determines the success of your product is how much people use it and whether they want to keep using it ongoing. And ultimately that you don't have a whole bunch of stuff there that's not being used, and you obviously don't have something which is so complex that people buy the story and then they implement it and they're like, what the hell is this? And they just get to the point where they're like, you know what, I'm just going to go get something else.
Love it, Danny. That's all I've got. Anything else from your side that you think we haven't touched on?
No, I think from a product perspective, it's a good run. As I said, there's a lot of overlap with the hardcore technology and what we built. I know they're very synergistic style themes and points of the conversation, but I don't know, it's all of this stuff really kind of overlaps and echoes value prop as well. It's like these things are hard. They're very hard and they require time and effort to look at. And I think the final kind of word of caution, again, in this kind of lovable era is don't think that like everyone's got the idea of this one-man founder now being the way forward, and I'm just going to make the agents go and do what we need to do. Like there's still areas like this that need attention. They need people to be able to work with people to work out what's the right features that they're going to build and what it needs to look like. And anyone who's just ignoring that and just trying to throw some prompts in and it looks like it's great on the surface because it looks like a pretty interface straight away, and they don't think about the experience is... there's going to be some challenges, I think, in a lot of those solutions. So make sure you do put the right focus and get people who can help you on that journey as well. Well said.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of the Failing Upward Club. If you like what you've heard, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, drop us comments, and we'll be back next week discussing more lessons from failure. See you later.